by attorney Tony Buzbee, who you just heard speaking there. Mr. Buzbee, thank you very much indeed for joining me. I want to read you a statement overnight from Janice Smalls-Combs, who is Diddy's mother. It came by her lawyer, Natalie Figures. It says this: I come to you today as a mother that is devastated and profoundly saddened by the allegations made against my son, Sean Combs. It is heartbreaking to see my son judged not for the truth, but for a narrative created out of lies. To bear witness what seems to be like a public lynching of my son before he's had the opportunity to prove his innocence is a pain too unbearable to put into words. Just first of all, your reaction to that statement from his mother.
That's exactly what I would expect the mother to say. You know, these allegations are shocking. These allegations are egregious. And that's why they have court systems, because we will ferret this out in the court system. We intend to prove our cases. Obviously, we're not going to prove our cases at a press conference. And, you know, with all due respect to her, you know, I've talked to these victims and I believe them. So that's exactly what I would expect his mother to say. Your
hotline took 12,000 calls in 24 hours, including many new allegations involving minors. At the moment, there's no class action. Each case you take will be represented individually. But just the fact you've got 120 already that you're repping, and you're getting so many calls, what does that tell you about the scale of all this?
Well, you know, I know that's reported 12,000 calls in a 24-hour period. And of course, that's true. I want people to know that, you know, obviously that's not 12,000 people claiming to be victimized by Sean Combs. That's, you know, a large portion of those people calling are calling with, you know, words of support. Others were prank calls and crank calls, as you might imagine, in this kind of situation. What's most interesting to me and what's most helpful are people that call that have bits of information, bits of evidence, video, perhaps pictures. And then, of course, we're particularly interested in people that had interaction with Mr. Combs and what they say happened to them and victims. But, you know, I was trying to get my head around the fact that, you know, we're talking about thousands of people calling and hundreds of alleged victims. And how could that possibly be the case? But, you know, when you put that in context and you think about conduct that allegedly occurred over a 25-year period in multiple different venues, parties every week, sometimes multiple times a week, and the same MO each time has been alleged. Typically, it involves some sort of illicit substance placed in someone's drink, and then that individual is coerced or taken advantage of. And that's kind of the overarching theme here. And so a lot of these calls, you know, on first glance, you say, my goodness, that's just impossible that many people would call with information or who have been victimized. But when you look at it in the context of a long period of time in a particular modus operandi, it makes a lot of sense.
I mean, numbers are staggering. You've also said that there are other big names that will come out in relation to these charges. He says the day will come, you said this, when you start naming names. When will that day be, and how big are these names that we're talking about?
Yeah, people are very interested in that, of course. That comment has been repeated back to me, as you might imagine, many times. And people are, you know, waiting with bated breath, hoping that, you know, I'm going to name these big celebrity names. But I can tell you this, I look at it in this context. If you attended one of these events, and we're talking about, you know, we've heard about the white party and the freak offs and the after parties, but there's also, you know, impromptu parties at studios, after parties from concerts, album release parties, hotel parties. I mean, the list goes on and on. But in my view, if you attended those and you saw or knew that somebody was being given drugs, that their drinks were being drugged, and you sat by and either participated in some of this activity or encouraged this activity or allowed it to go on and helped cover it up, or were in the room while it was happening and said nothing and did not intervene, and perhaps attended more of these parties knowing that this type of conduct was going to occur, it's my view, that it may not be the criminal justice system's view, but it's certainly my view that you're complicit. And we intend to name people in these lawsuits. We're not going to do it in interviews. We're not going to do it, you know, without doing our due diligence, because obviously, you know, these types of allegations are very hurtful to people. if they're not true, and very hurtful, frankly, if they are true. But if they're true, you shouldn't have been in the room and you shouldn't have been participating. So I anticipate that we're going to start filing lawsuits, and it may not be big names at first, but we have a long list of names, and you might imagine in situations like this that when a victim tells us that this person was in the room or this person participated, we want to do as much due diligence as humanly possible before we file that case, because in the United States, in almost every state, public filings are in fact public. And, when you name somebody in a lawsuit, the press is going to pick it up, and we're aware of that. So we're going to make sure that we dot our I's and cross our T's. And I expect that there will be some people named in these lawsuits that will raise some eyebrows.
Right. I mean, how big an eyebrow raise are we talking about? Because you've been hearing a lot of names, presumably, in the process of all these calls coming in. And you're a pretty smart lawyer, so you can probably work out the wheat from the chaff in terms of legitimate, plausible claims here in terms of victims. I mean, are we talking about names as big as Diddy, potentially?
I expect so. I expect so. Obviously those are the names that people are interested in, but I've tried to make sure people focus also on corporate entities, to include banks and hotels and perhaps even pharmaceutical entities that were maybe not directly involved, but were certainly benefiting and profiting from this kind of activity. Those I'm interested in as well. But we've seen all over social media the pictures and video of all the various individuals that attended these parties. And, look, I was born at night, but I wasn't born last night. I know that at these types of parties, things go on. I know that there's, sex occurs out in the open and things like that. That's not illegal and that's not probably actionable. What I'm focused on is when people are lured to these parties, coerced at these parties, given illicit drugs at this party without their knowledge, and then they're taken advantage of. And people in the room know this is happening and participate in it and do nothing about it and then tacitly cover it up. Those people, in my mind, are just as liable as the individuals who engage directly in the activity.
And of the 120 cases you've taken on so far, what percentage involve minors? And what is the split of male and female alleged victims?
It's about 25 out of the 120, but as you might imagine, since we did the press conference, that number is growing.
Sorry, 25 minors or?
25 minors out of the 120 clients, yes, sir. And the minors, they kind of fall into two categories. One would be the category of individuals with stars in their eyes trying to break into the entertainment industry, who were either scouted or somehow found their way to a studio or to a location where they were being screened. And either the allegation is Mr. Combs himself or those around him involved took advantage of these people in some sort of quid pro quo to try to make them a star. And, in some of these cases, it was the parents who were essentially handing their child off to a group of people that they trusted and who they thought were going to make their child a star. That's one group. The second group of minors would be individuals who were recruited, whether it be in a hotel lobby, whether it be at a show from the crowd, invited to a after concert party that made its way to a hotel, whether it be to some of the parties that we all heard about. They went there at age 16. There's a few that, for instance, attended a party in the Hamptons and they were only 16 and taken advantage of there. So it pretty runs the gamut. But it's the allegations obviously are very egregious. We have to be very careful and responsible about how we pursue these. These are individual cases, will be filed. Each case will live or die on its own merits. Each case will have one or more defendants. In some cases, they'll all, they may be different. Some will be filed in New York. I would expect most of them will be filed because New York has a statute of limitations that's pretty generous. New York State has recognized that these types of allegations, it takes people a long time to come forward. It takes a lot of courage to come forward. So New York has recognized that. I think California has too. So I would expect most of these cases will be filed in those two states. And we're gonna pursue these cases aggressively. And the reason for the press conference is because, I wanted to make sure that we, Sean Combs obviously has been arrested. He's been indicted. His bail has been denied, I think, 3 times at this point. I don't expect he's going anywhere. We want to make sure that every entity and every individual who had some role in this, that we examine that, and if the law supports it, that we bring them in and make them a part of this case as well.
And just on that second point about the gender split here, there have been lots of rumours that it's not just women or girls who've been involved in being abused here, but also young boys and young men. Can you clarify how many of your own cases are male?
I would say that number is 50-50. According to the client group, it looks like when you try to, if you were to graph it, the number of males increased dramatically after 2015. We've looked at this client group and vetted it in so many different ways, as you would expect, that you can see a trend that the number of males involved increased somewhere around the 2015 timeframe. I don't know why that is, but that's what the numbers show.
And based on the volume of claims you're getting, does that mean that these widespread rumors about Diddy's sexuality are likely to be true?
Yeah, I won't comment on that. I can only comment on the allegations that are being made, that will be made in a public filing. And I'll let people draw their own conclusions, but I will say that 50% of the alleged victims are in fact male. And that includes the minors that were minors at the time of the allegations.
I mean, it's truly shocking, some of these statistics you're giving. In relation to tapes or videos and stuff that you've been told about or has come into your possession, have you seen material, evidential material, which in your estimation as a lawyer could cross the line into criminal activity?
That's a difficult question. As most of your viewers know, the standard of proof in a civil case versus a criminal case is very different. In a criminal case, you have to prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt. That's why the federal authorities, they typically won't bring a case unless it's rock solid. And I'm sure they talked to a lot of people. They collected a lot of evidence. And, from all of that, there's only 3 counts. The civil system is the standard of proof is preponderance of the evidence. I like to describe it when I'm in court as more likely than not. And so when you look at these videos and pictures and bottles of oil that I've received and other things that we've been given, the piece of evidence, the piece of physical evidence or the video in and of itself doesn't really prove anything. You see a sexual act being performed on video, but you need a witness or the victim to kind of put this in context. You see some sexual act that was captured by a third party on video. You still have to have somebody to say, okay, that individual who was engaged in that's who that is. And this individual who was engaged in that was drugged, and so that people are very interested into what do you have on video and what do you have as by way of evidence. And ultimately, in these kinds of cases, it ultimately comes down to he said, she said. That's it every single time, or he said, he said. And so the most important thing is the credibility of the victim. And typically, in these cases, the defense is always the same. When you bring these kinds of allegations against someone, the first defense is always attack the victim, try to destroy the credibility of the victim. And what I'm looking for is to make sure that the victim, that I have the evidence to put the victim in the room with the alleged perpetrator. And then I try to collect witnesses and other data to corroborate what occurred. But ultimately, it comes down to the credibility of the victim and the credibility of the alleged perpetrator. And that's why hopefully we do a very good job on the front end and make it clear to these people who are calling in that make these allegations that, look, ultimately, you'll have to testify publicly in front of a jury in an open court and tell your story, and you'll be cross-examined, and your name will be known. And that helps me, do the fact checking that we need to do to make sure that we're only bringing those claims that we believe are most credible. And unfortunately, sometimes people with real claims, real legitimate claims, it makes it difficult for them to even pursue these.
Right.
And when you feather in the fact that in many of these cases, the allegation is that the individual was drugged, it makes it even more difficult because this particular drug, this liquid G, they call it, which is basically a date rape drug, it almost wipes your memory. So, it's a Herculean task with this many people making these types of claims, but just if they were just one claim, it's difficult enough. So this is a challenge. I think we're on the right side of this, and we're going to pursue these as aggressively as the court system will allow.
And finally, Mr. Buzbee, how long have you been a lawyer?
Coming up on 30 years.
Have you ever been involved in anything on this scale?
When the BP Horizon explosion occurred and that vessel sank, we had, obviously thousands of clients. I dealt with the Deshaun Watson cases, obviously not of this scope, but, there was a lot of media attention, but certainly nothing like this. I think, I didn't just fall off the turnip truck. I've been around for a while. Even I was very surprised about the scope of this and the amount of people stepping forward who said they were victimized based upon conduct either performed by or orchestrated by Sean Combs.
It's truly shocking. Tony Buzbee from Houston, thank you very much indeed. I appreciate you joining me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.